You ever watch a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat and everybody claps like something real just happened? That's what it feels like watching grown adults try to pass off ancient religious claims as credible debate topics, and then get mad when you won't play along. Let's just say the resurrection happened. Let's assume a virgin really did give birth. No, that's not debate. That's theological cosplay, and I'm not here to pretend with people who can't even be honest with themselves. I don't debate Christians, not because I'm scared of what they believe, but because I know where those beliefs come from. I know the source material, I know the tactics, I know how the stage is set, and I refuse to validate a magic trick just because the audience believes in it. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. It's recognizing that a bad premise doesn't deserve a good platform, and that saying no to delusion isn't closed minded, it's clarity. So if you've ever been told that declining to debate means you're afraid, or that you owe religion the courtesy of a seat at every table, this video is for you. Because sometimes the most responsible thing you can do with a myth is walk away from the performance. Today, I want to lay the foundation as to why I do not engage debate with religious superstition. Let's go. There must be a shared objective and a respectable premise. For a debate to be productive, participants need to respect each other's viewpoints, remain focused on the facts and the logic of the argument, and be open to revisiting their own opinions based on new information. It's crucial to avoid making the debate personal and to maintain intellectual honesty and humility. A shared objective and a spirit of inquiry also contribute to a productive debate. If we're going to call it a debate, a dialogue, or even a disagreement worth having, we have to start by asking, what are we both trying to build here? A shared objective is asking the question, is there a mutual why? A conversation without a shared purpose isn't dialogue, it's just noise. If you're here to learn and I'm here to lecture, we're not aligned. If I want clarity and you want control, we're not in conversation, we're in conflict theater. To move forward, both parties must desire growth or understanding over winning, agree on what a productive outcome looks like, be willing to leave with more perspective, not just more proof of what they already thought. An example of this is that we're both trying to understand how this impacts our community, so let's stay on that. Which now gets us to the point of a respectable premise. Is the foundation worth building on? If someone starts a conversation with, just assume the virgin birth is real, or what if God really did tell someone to slaughter their children? Let's say slavery in the Bible was okay for its time. Then we have a problem. Why? Because the premise is built on superstition, not shared reality. You cannot demand someone treat a myth as a maybe just because it's in your sacred text. If we wouldn't entertain the conversation about Santa governing foreign policy or fairies determining gender roles, we shouldn't do it with unprovable religious claims either. Without a respectable premise, the entire structure collapses. The truth of the matter is, emotional maturity requires intellectual integrity. Too many people confuse tolerance with intellectual dishonesty. You can love someone and still decline to entertain a premise that's rooted in fiction. I respect you, but I cannot respect this claim as a valid starting point for meaningful dialogue. That's not arrogant, that's ethical. Because when you validate an unreasonable premise, you lower the floor of reality and risk dragging down everyone with it. Before engaging, ask, are we working toward the same goal? Do we agree on the kind of evidence or reasoning we'll accept? Is this conversation grounded in reality or in deference to dogma? If the answer is no, then there is no productive debate. That's not a shutdown. That's a boundary rooted in clarity. You can't build a bridge with someone who insists the ground you're standing on doesn't actually exist. And you don't owe anyone the mental labor of making their delusion feel logical. A good debate begins when reason and respect overlap. Everything else, that's just a performance dressed up like a conversation. Granting hypotheticals legitimizes superstition. Some arguments don't just waste your time, they waste your credibility. Let's just assume the resurrection happened, or okay, for the sake of argument, what if Jesus really was born of a virgin? Or what if the Bible is actually literal history? These aren't harmless thought experiments, they're entry points for irrationality dressed in the costume of curiosity. Hypotheticals are not neutral. When you grant religious hypotheticals, you're not just being open-minded, you are giving supernatural claims equal weight to reasoned arguments. You're modeling to others, especially young minds, that fiction deserves airtime if enough people believe it. And you're also giving legitimacy to unfalsifiable dogma, which no other field of study would entertain. No one would say, let's assume Zeus might be real. How would that impact climate change? We don't do this with mythology, folklore, or fan fiction, so why should we do it with theology? Hypotheticals create psychological loopholes. When you engage in religious hypotheticals, you make room for belief to hide in what ifs. This is exactly how superstition survives scrutiny. By smuggling itself into critical spaces disguised as dialogue, by avoiding direct claims but always suggesting possibility, by making you seem like the closed-minded one for rejecting the premise. Superstition thrives when you validate it as worthy of exploration rather than holding it accountable as a claim with the burden of proof. And then we have to be careful because assumptions are scaffolding. Be careful what you build on. A hypothetical is never just a question, it's a starting point. And where you start shapes where you can go. If your opening premise is, let's assume a man rose from the dead, then your destination can never be reason, because your foundation is already myth. Intellectual integrity requires truth-based architecture, not magical thinking propped up by politeness. This actually matters for young and curious minds. Every time we publicly entertain baseless hypotheticals, we create a false equivalence between superstition and scholarship. We reinforce the idea that belief must be respected even when it's irrational, and we train emerging thinkers to hear both sides even when one side has no evidence. This is especially dangerous for young adults trying to rebuild their worldview or people navigating religious trauma and deconstructing minds looking for grounded foundations. We're not just responsible for what we say, we're responsible for what our platforms validate. So you don't owe anyone a debate built on delusion. Granting hypotheticals is not humility. It's compliance disguised as kindness. Let faith defend itself. Let superstition provide evidence. You're not closed-minded for declining to play pretend. You're principled, because truth-seeking doesn't begin with, let's say magic is real. It begins with, show me why I should believe this at all. If the topic was anything else, we'd laugh. Let's be honest, some of the claims that dominate religious belief wouldn't survive a single serious conversation if they were about anything other than God. You wouldn't debate a modern Jedi about the mechanics of the Force. You wouldn't, or at least you shouldn't, debate a flat earther about planetary alignment. And you wouldn't debate a mythologist about the literal return of Zeus, or a Hogwarts student about wand theory in physics class. And yet somehow, God came back to life and lives in you spiritually, gets treated like a TED Talk starter. A virgin gave birth to the Savior of the universe is framed as a reasonable premise. God flooded the entire planet but loves you personally is spoken with a straight face in courts, schools, and Congress. Let's name this. This is called sanitized superstition. Sanitized superstition is the process of laundering absurd ideas through tradition, repetition, and respectability until they sound like legitimate conversation starters. It's why Jesus rose from the dead is called faith, but Zeus threw lightning bolts is called mythology. It's not about logic, it's about legacy. It's not that these ideas are more reasonable, they're just more familiar. So we don't laugh, not because it makes sense, but because we've been conditioned not to. When we don't name the absurdity, we validate dangerous beliefs as just another perspective, which sets a precedence that emotional tradition equals epistemological authority. This teaches young minds that delusion deserves a seat at the table as long as it's wrapped in reverence. Respect should be earned by ideas, not inherited by mythology. We don't owe irrationality a platform just because it's familiar. We don't need to keep pretending that beliefs are valid just because they're old, and we certainly don't need to keep debating things that would be dismissed outright if they didn't wear the costume of religion. Sanitized superstition is still superstition, and just because it's been baptized in culture doesn't mean it belongs in the classroom or in your worldview for that matter. If it sounds absurd when Zeus says it, it's still absurd when Yahweh says it. So let's stop pretending. Christianity has no justifiable premise. Every meaningful conversation requires at least one shared foundation. A justifiable premise, a place where evidence, logic, or lived reality gives us mutual fitting. Without that, you're not having a dialogue. You're performing in someone else's fantasy. Imagine walking into a courtroom, a science lab, or a university classroom, and someone says, let's just say a guy rose someone from the dead, proving the power of Voltron. Would the discussion go forward? No, because without shared logic, there's no debate, only delusion dressed in formality. This brings us to the problem with giving Christianity a pass. Religion has mastered a manipulation trick. It asks to be taken seriously while refusing to take itself seriously by the standards of logic and evidence that apply to every other domain of life. We wouldn't entertain a flat earther in a NASA boardroom. We wouldn't let a psychic testify in a criminal trial. We wouldn't approve a school textbook based on the necessary existence of mermaids and unicorns. But religion, it gets a pass because we've been trained to equate reverence with legitimacy. So let's break down Christianity's core premises. Ask yourself, which part meets the bar of reason? The virgin birth? A biological impossibility treated as divine truth that we'd instantly reject if it were claimed in any other context. If a teenager walks into a clinic and said, I'm pregnant, but I've never had sex, would we write hymns or run blood tests? How about the Trinity? A math-defying contradiction. 3 equals 1, but also equals 3, simultaneously separate, unified, and co-eternal. This isn't theology, it's a riddle that fails Logic 101. What about the resurrection? A story about a corpse reanimating with no verifiable evidence, told by anonymous sources decades later. In any other setting, this is myth, not material for debate. What about creation from dirt? A myth that denies evolution, biology, and planetary history, reducing 13.8 billion years of cosmology to poof, dirt, man. And then the second coming, a prophecy that never happened, spun for centuries as soon, while entire generations lived, suffered, and died waiting. The real issue is Christianity doesn't have a premise, it has a privilege. We don't accept these kinds of claims from any other system unless it's wearing the costume of religion. So let's be clear. If the premise is fiction, then the conversation is fan fiction. You're not required to debate a belief just because it's popular. You're not obligated to pretend nonsense becomes noble just because it's old. And you certainly don't have to argue with someone whose evidence is feelings and folklore. Christianity doesn't offer a premise. It offers a protected assumption and demands you respect it. But respect is not owed to superstition. And participation is not proof of open-mindedness. The next time someone invites you into a debate about Christianity, ask, what part of this conversation is rooted in something we can both touch, test, or trust? If the answer is none of it, then don't mistake their certainty for credibility. They're not bringing evidence. They're bringing nostalgia, fear, and stories. And that might belong in a Sunday school play, but it doesn't belong in a serious conversation. Debate should clarify, not confuse. The point of debate isn't noise, it's clarity. It's to sharpen understanding, challenge assumptions, and when done well, move both participants and audiences closer to truth. But here's the thing. You're not closed-minded for refusing to argue with someone who refuses to meet you on the ground of reason. That's not arrogance. It's discernment. That's not fear. It's boundaries. That's not intellectual weakness. It's mental hygiene. Debating delusion doesn't elevate the truth. It distorts it. When you debate someone who brings myth, magic, and misinformation to the table and calls it truth, you risk doing 3 very dangerous things. Number 1, you waste your energy defending reality against fiction. You turn facts into fodder, and the more time you spend on their terms, the more they've already won. Not in truth, but in attention. You also give credibility to superstition by participating at all. When you argue with someone claiming the earth is 6,000 years old or Jesus is coming back any day now, your presence in the conversation signals that their claim is worth serious consideration, even when it's not. And number 3, you create the illusion that all ideas deserve equal time, but ideas aren't equal. Some are grounded in evidence, others are glued together with emotion, fear, and centuries of echo chambers. This isn't intellectual equality, it's a false equivalence, and false equivalence is the enemy of discernment. Now, what debate should be is a meeting of minds with a mutual respect for reason, a dialogue where evidence matters more than emotion, and a test of ideas, not a test of your patience. And when those conditions aren't present, refusing to engage isn't running away from the truth, it's protecting the truth from being dragged into circus tents. Now, what refusing debate is not, it's not intellectual cowardice. It's knowing the difference between a conversation and a con. It's not cancel culture, it's content control, refusing to broadcast confusion as if it's credibility. And it's not arrogance, it's alignment. You're clear on what deserves your time. Debate should lift the fog, not create more of it. So if someone wants to argue fantasy as if it's fact, if they want you to just consider the possibility of snake talkers, virgin birth, and sky gods, don't play along. Because some arguments don't reveal the strength of your position, they just reveal how much foolishness you're willing to entertain. I don't debate fantasy. I educate minds ready for reality. And sometimes the wisest thing you can say is, this conversation isn't worthy of the truth I'm carrying. Debate should be between equals. Let's make something clear. Debate is not a game. It's not a flex of ego, nor a spectacle of pride. It is the serious exchange of ideas amongst those committed to truth. And as Dr. John Henrik Clarke once says, I only debate my equals. All others, I teach. That quote isn't arrogance. It's alignment with self, with truth, and with purpose. You don't owe your time, energy, or intellect to anyone who denies your humanity while demanding your attention, brings superstition to a reasoned table, seeks a platform, not a conversation, or shows up to win, not to learn. If someone shows up to twist your identity, insult your intelligence, or trap you in theological gymnastics, then they haven't shown up as your equal. They've shown up as your assignment, and not every assignment deserves a submission. Debate doesn't have to equal platform. Too often, debate is weaponized by those who don't want understanding. They want ammunition. They don't come to explore nuance, they come to exploit attention. And by dignifying delusion with dialogue, you don't elevate the conversation. You give the illusion of equality where none exists. So here's the truth. If your ideas aren't grounded in shared logic, evidence, or good faith, then this isn't a debate. This is a distraction. And I'm not here to perform in your circus just because you call it a coliseum. Some people don't want a dialogue. They want a dopamine hit of dominance. But I wasn't called to spar with superstition. I'm here to build with the willing. Debate should never be a reward for ignorance, and it should never be a stage for someone who's already shown up with a closed mind and a loaded question. So if you're wondering why I won't engage your favorite apologist, preacher, or pew-sitting provocateur, it's simple. I don't debate those who mistake authority for accuracy and confuse confidence with competence. As Dr. Clarke reminded us, I only debate my equals. All others, I teach. And sometimes I just move on because class is dismissed. And as a special bonus, I wanted to give you this one. Religious gods don't exist outside the books that claim them. Let's stop pretending that gods are free-floating truths just waiting to be discovered. Religious gods don't exist independently. They exist textually. They exist mythologically. They exist within the confines of the stories, the books, and the claims that birth them. And once you examine the book and the claims, the whole house of worship collapses like a stage prop. Let me make it plain. I didn't lose faith because of pain, hurt, or disappointment. As a matter of fact, as a former pastor, I had become well equipped at finding ways to reconcile disappointment with divine destiny. I didn't stop believing because I got angry with God. I stopped believing because the foundation itself was false. The entire structure of belief was built on two flawed assumptions. Number one, that the Bible was indeed true. And number two, that the people who passed it down had verified that truth. But the second assumption was a cover-up for the first. And the first was never truth, just a tradition with a title. Now, once I removed those assumptions, I realized I never had a good reason to believe in a God. In the first place, I was never presented with a reason. I was presented propaganda as to why the reason wasn't necessary. So let's use a simple analogy. Bigfoot. Believing in God because others claim to have seen or experienced him is the same as believing in Bigfoot because someone swore they saw footprints in the woods. But then you find out the footprints were faked, the photos were staged, and the stories were passed down without evidence. What's likely to happen next? You stop believing in Bigfoot. Not because you hate Bigfoot for not showing up when you really, really wanted him to, but because the footprints were a lie. The reason for belief disappears when the initial claims are disproven. Enter the gin particle. In theoretical physics, a gin particle is a hypothetical object that appears only under very specific fleeting conditions. It exists only in a particular timeline where events actually occurred. But once you realize that timeline never happened, that particle vanishes. Not just metaphorically, it was never there. That's exactly how religious belief operates. The version of God being defended only exists within a timeline where the claims of the Bible are true. That a virgin gave birth, that a man rose from the dead, that the sky opened and voices spoke. If those events happened, maybe the belief has a case. But once you find out that timeline never existed, not historically, not scientifically, not credibly, the central reason for belief collapses. You don't just lose belief, you lose the entire scenario that made the belief possible or necessary in the first place. There are no footprints, no voice, no timeline, no John Connor. Just an echo bouncing off the walls of a story that was never grounded in truth. God becomes a sociological gin particle, a phantom idea contingent on a false history sustained by tradition and vaporized by verification, only existing in this sliver of time where tradition was mistaken for truth. Then, God is not the conclusion of investigation. God is the starting assumption, smuggled in without scrutiny. And once we inspect that starting point, the virgin birth doesn't hold, the resurrection falls apart, the moral framework cracks, the promise of afterlife fizzle into fear-based marketing. The gods we're being asked to believe in don't exist in the evidence. They don't exist in experience. They only exist in the books that claim them, and only in those books. Remove the book and watch the God disappear. Because if Yahweh, Allah, or any other deity existed outside of Scripture, we wouldn't need preachers to defend them. They just exist. So, I'm not trying to be edgy, I'm trying to be honest. And the honest truth is, you cannot defend a being who doesn't exist without defending the book that made them up. And once that book fails the test, the God goes with it. I don't believe in your God, not because I'm mad at him, but because I finally had the courage to look for him outside the pages he was trapped in. And he wasn't there. Not a trace. Not a whisper. Not even a footprint. Because belief in God isn't just unwarranted, it's non sequitur. There is no premise, no source, no signal. Just a sacred echo bouncing inside a closed book. Debating Christianity without a justifiable premise is like arguing quantum mechanics with a person who insists midichlorians are real. At some point, we have to stop pretending that every belief deserves a podium. Until the claim can be reasonably justified, it's not debate, it's delusion with a microphone. So we don't need another viral debate. We need communities that work. We need worldviews that heal. We need courage that builds, not just performs. Because here's the truth. You can only spend so long arguing over ancient sandcastles before you realize you've got the tools to build a city. You've got the vision to frame a future, and you've got the clarity to stop making room for delusion just because it's been grandfathered in. So no, I won't debate Christians, not because I'm afraid of the gospel, but because I'm more committed to the blueprint for what comes next. If we're going to build a better world, it starts with better questions, better tools, and better conversations, not recycled fairy tales hiding behind holy branding. Let them defend magic. We're building meaning. Let them defend mythology. We'll design systems. Let them shout about salvation. We'll show up for each other right here, right now. And if you're with me, if you're tired of playing pretend and ready to build something real, then stop waiting for permission. Stop chasing ghosts and start creating futures, because belief didn't build this. We did. And we're just getting started. Listen, if you've enjoyed this conversation today, don't forget to subscribe, share, and join the movement, because we're not just walking away from belief, we're building a bridge to something better. Until next time, keep rising.